of its main campus.
Mm-hmm.
We actually were one of the last institution to fully desegregate.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think it took so long for TCU to get with the program?
Gee, I could only speculate. I don't know.
Let's speculate.
My understanding is the board members have a lot to do with what happens with the campus. And that sounds like, okay, that's not rocket science. But you had a lot of people who were dug in. And they stayed for a very long time. And not until recently did we have people that look like you and me on the board. Two of them I know very well, Ron Parker and Cheryl Atkins Green, who CMO and Mary Kay. But she's a past client of mine when I ran my business, my PR agency. Her company that she's working for at the time was my client. And since then, we've been friends. And Ron Parker, at the time, was, I believe, just the outgoing president of the Executive Leadership Council, which is the group of African-American Fortune 500 leaders. They're all CEOs, C-suite, senior executive leaders. Comer Cottrell, whose nephew was the boyfriend, he went here too, by the way. Joey Cottrell, he might talk. Joey was the boyfriend of Myra. Myra was my soror that was a nursing student that, my nails got. She's Filipino, by the way. She's not black, but she was my soror. And she dated Joey, who's also black. But yeah, Comer Cottrell was the founder of Proline hair care products, which ended up getting gobbled up by Alberto Culver. That's where Cheryl Atkins Green, that's where I met her, at Proline. And Alberto Culver gobbled it up. And essentially, so Cheryl is a member of the Executive Leadership Council. That was where they're pulling a lot of their new board members from. In fact, I think there's somebody from PepsiCo that just joined recently, outside of LaDania. But all that to be said, we didn't have a black board member back then. And I just feel like people were set in their ways, and they liked the TCU that was always the TCU. And if there were black students that were coming here, you had to be able to blend, assimilate. Otherwise, you best be on those athletic programs, making money for the school.
I see.
That's just that's the tone that we felt.
So let's talk about integration in different areas. Since we recently spoke about cheerleading, are you familiar with Ron Hurdle and his story? And as a cheerleader, were you informed of the challenges that he had to go through in order to be?
And let me make sure I know who Ron is. Ron was the first cheerleader?
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know anything about that. In fact, I didn't learn that until you guys did the retelling. I think marketing put out a video.
Right.
And I was like, wow, I didn't even know who he was. Yeah. Had no clue.
Yes. So although this was 20 years before your time, some of the stories you're telling me clearly echo that
and
same
my understanding was that Leanne and I weren't the first. There were at least one or two other female cheerleaders on the co-ed team. But I was not aware of a male cheerleader being the first one. Had no clue.
Well, let's talk about another first then. In the footsteps of Dr. Jennifer Giddings Brooks, you also ran for homecoming queen. And, most of those first, like Ron Hurdle or Dr. Brooks, they always tell us the same thing. They didn't realize they were making history at the time. They always tell us that. Did you know when you were running for homecoming queen about Dr. Brooks' trailblazing achievements?
Well, I was told about Jennifer, and it came up just as I was nominated. I had 2 nominations. One from the basketball team, who had not nominated someone for homecoming queen in some years. I was told like 20 years. They hadn't used their ballot or whatever it was called. And Alan Tolley, he might talk, I don't know. He was on the basketball team at that time. Kurt Thomas, who went on to be in the NBA, he was a part of that team. They kind of saw me as a little sister. I didn't date any of them, but we got along great. And they were under the belief, because of the column, because I was an RA, and because I was active on campus. There is a whole story around getting MLK as a university holiday. I was instrumental in that. They felt like that if I ran, I would win. And they had to talk me into it. I didn't want to. And I told you why.
Yes.
I saw what happened to my sister. I didn't want any part of that. And I also felt like, it was the first real indications that maybe it was sexist, the way it was set up. But since it wasn't a pageant per se, maybe you could persuade me. I don't know. What do I have to do again? You know?
Yeah.
And so they went back and talked to their coach about it. In the meantime, the Cheer 2 organization nominated me for queen. And so at that point I told them, y'all, I really don't even know that I want to. Let me think about it. So I went back. I had these 2 nominations just sitting in my lap. And I talked to my roommates about it and some of my sorors, and they're like, girl, you should do it because you'll win, hands down. And I was like, yeah. Okay, well, let me go back and talk to the guys. I talked to them. They convinced me. And I said, okay, I'll do it. And went back to the coach, put in my nomination. And apparently whoever got the nomination got the nomination. Word got back to Cheer 2 before I could go back to Cheer 2 and tell them. And they said, oh, so you have 2. And I said, yeah. And so one of the girls said, well, coach, what do you think that we should give the nomination to somebody else since she already has one? And I was kind of stunned, but I guess I was like, is that fair? I don't know. Do I really care about queen? I probably don't. So whatever, right? So they gave it to this other person who had actually become queen, but bookmark there. So yeah, that happened. The 2 weeks between the time that the nominations went in and the time that they voted and we actually went on the parade and went on the 50-yard line, excruciating. Wow. Completely excruciating. Well, between the fact that because the basketball guys, they didn't know the rules of engagement. None of us did. None of the black students knew what it was to run for queen.
Right.
They hadn't had a candidate since 1971.
Right. So
nobody on campus knew what the rules were, and who knew if they changed or not. The guys were hanging out the Moncrief windows when I would walk by. Michelle! I mean, they're yelling and going on. And come to find out, we weren't supposed to campaign. Didn't know that. So somebody reported the basketball guys in, and then reported me too. Like I could control them yelling from the windows. I didn't ask them to.
Right.
But I got reported because I was campaigning because the basketball guys were yelling my name across campus.
Well, if that's all it takes to campaign, then
it's not like we had banners made,
right.
You know, it's just
commercials.
Right, it wasn't anything like that. So they got chided. I had to go back to the basketball players because nobody was communicating with them and tell them, hey guys, keep it low because apparently I'm risking my nomination if you guys are hollering across the campus. Who knew, right? Okay, cool, we'll be quiet about it, but we want everybody to vote for you. I said, well, I appreciate that, but y'all shh. The next thing that went down, because my column ran on a Thursday, every Thursday, without fail, for 2 years. And it just so happened that voting was going to happen on a Thursday. There were some students that went to the Skiff and complained because my column was going to run the same day as voting. Can't do that. Pull her column. Of course, Alfred was not going to do that. And then the adults got involved. And ultimately, my column got pulled. So it didn't run on the Thursday that people were supposed to vote.
Right.
The other thing that would happen, which is actually something that Phyllis told me, the morning of the parade. Now, back then, the parade happened the same day as the, it was a pep rally. Okay. The pep rally happened the same day as game day, right before game day, back where Frog Fountain was in a totally different place. In the student center, Brown Lumpton was right there. There was a drive right in front. Oh. And so all the cars with the nominees would come through. I was actually in a bright purple drop top Mustang from one of the Homecoming King candidates. Blonde, blue-eyed Ken doll who was so down to earth. Turned out at the time, it was Martina Navratilova's girlfriend's son. And she had gifted him that car. Wow. So he was already open-minded. He was like, yeah, he didn't mind being in the car with me or anything like that. But we were pulling up, and that's when Phyllis walks up to me and said, you were robbed. And apparently the night before was when the ballots went in. And she told me, and I got an indication from some of my Skiff colleagues too, they would count the ballots that night, and they would be up to like midnight or whatever. Once it was done, they would let everybody go home. They were sent home. And one of them called me and said, I can't tell you what happened, but tomorrow's a good day. I was like, really? And then I got the indication that they were called back. So everybody was called back. Some kind of recount. What Phyllis would share with me that morning was the black students that voted for Queen. They didn't vote a full ballot. They didn't vote for, juniors, sophomore, whatever.
Right.
And apparently the rules were you were supposed to vote for a full ballot. But nobody knew that. They showed up and voted for me.
Yes.
And so they threw those ballots out when they did the recount.
Wow.
And so I was greeted with this news on the back of this purple Mustang.
Yes.
And I'm faced with the idea of having to walk out on the 50-yard line where they call the Queen's name, right?
Yes.
Now, in my estimation, there was somebody else who probably would win. If it wasn't going to be me, it was going to be Jamie. Forgot Jamie's last name. Jamie was a showgirl. Cutest thing in the world. I don't know if she was biracial. I don't know what she was. But everybody loved Jamie. And if it wasn't going to be me, it was going to be Jamie. And if it sure wasn't going to be Jamie, it was going to be Penny. Because Penny was an RA and everybody loved Penny, right? None of these people won. And as it turned out, the girl who won was a member of a huge white sorority that didn't necessarily know her. But the rule was, if you had somebody running, you get the block vote. She also was dating a little brother. So they have these little brother organizations. And the rule there is, if they're dating somebody who's on the court, everybody votes. So as I'm walking down the 50-yard line, I look up and I see Chancellor Tucker sitting right by her dad. And I was like, Phyllis was right. So the pictures of me that day, I have a smile on my face, but believe me, I was not bringing my full self.
Right.
I was holding back tears. It's like, I didn't even want to be in this. What are they doing, But yeah, in the midst of all that, Jennifer Giddings called my dorm room out of the blue. 2 days before homecoming, this is how I got to know Jennifer. And she's like, do you know my story? And I said, well, I know you're the first homecoming queen. And that's when she told me, she's like, yes, 1971. I was like, I was born in 1971. She's like, where are you from? I'm like, I'm from Dallas. What part of Dallas? Oak Cliff. Where in Oak Cliff? Cedar Crest. You're kidding me. I lived right across the street from the Cedar Crest golf course, she told me. I was like, that sounds like Van Cleve Drive. It's either Van Cleve or Sutherland. And she said Van Cleve Drive. I was like, I was born in the house that Jethro Pugh used to own before my dad bought it. Jethro Pugh is a former Dallas Cowboy. But I lived down the hill and Jennifer lived up the hill. Wow. So we automatically had this, oh my goodness, kind of bond. Right. And then she went on to tell me, she said, look it up, go to the library, look at the microfiche, and see what my journey was all about. But I will tell you, be prepared if you win, because winning is about going to country clubs where they don't want to see you. And she said she would go into those country clubs, they'd spit on her, they didn't make her feel welcome at all, even though she was the queen. Yes. And she said, this is the problem. You may be representing a really great school, but you're going to walk into spaces where you're not welcome. Right. Just be ready for that. And so that was very sobering, and I took her advice. I went to TCU library, buried myself in microfilm and microfiche to find out that Chancellor Tucker didn't kiss her on the cheek. And that was the controversy. It was in the Skiff, but it was also in the Star Telegram. It was in the Dallas Morning News. It was everywhere because this was a huge thing. And I was like, wow, this is deep. I got the same chancellor too. So,
years later.
Yeah, could not say that I was shocked, but I was definitely saddened by it because I was like, people went to great lengths to make sure this didn't happen. So it hurt me. It hurt me really badly. And like to this day, you can see I'm like, So my dad made the same trip to TCU that he made to DBU. But he would do this in a way that was very interesting. He would never tell us that he was coming. He'd show up on campus and he'd go to the administrative building, and some student would find us and say, I saw your daddy. Your daddy was up at the student center. He's going in the administrative building. What's he doing? He was in a 3-piece suit, you know? And I'm like, daddy didn't call me to say he was here. We're going to let him do whatever he's doing. But he went to visit Chancellor Tucker. And he waited because apparently he didn't have an appointment. They told him, you have an appointment. He's like, does he walk out of that door when he leaves? Yes. Well, then I'll sit here. It was that kind of thing. So anyway, I quit the cheerleader squad as a result of that. It was very hard because I was actually one of the bases that stunted, and I had to lift her. Oh. And the next stunt after that, yeah.
A pyramid.
And I was like, it's a good thing I'm a Christian because I could be like, here she goes, right? But no, and the sad thing was, it wasn't anybody I disliked.
Yeah.
And I think she was shocked too, to be honest, because but besides the fact that her dad was sitting by the chancellor, it probably wasn't that much of a shock, but that she actually had the numbers to make it happen. And it's debatable that she did, but she did. And Eamon Carter, the people in the stadium kind of was like, there was not a big applause because they just didn't know who she was. Like I said, it should have been Penny or Jamie.
Right.
And neither one. Right.
Yeah.
So anyway, I quit the squad. So if you look at the yearbook.
Yes.
In 93, you will see my picture appears in some of the candid photos. But the group shot, I'm not in it. I didn't take the picture.
Yeah. So that's interesting how her father was sitting next to the chancellor, but yet your father had to go and wait until the chancellor came out of his office just to catch.
Yeah. And I ran into Chancellor Tucker. Bob Schieffer was in town for an event, and it wasn't a TCU event, but TCU had a table and a lot of people were there, and Dean Bunton was the one that invited me because we were there to represent Schieffer. At the time, I'd been on the board of visitors for Schieffer for some years, and I was also on the billboards and the bus panels, and I walked into the building downtown in Fort Worth, and there was Chancellor Tucker, and he's up in age now, and I don't think he recognized me, but I made a point to go over and say hello, and went on and spoke to Miss Bunton, Dr. Bunton, and whoever else was there. But that was kind of a weird moment too. But Dean Bunton knew the story. I told her the story because she was the one that sought me out to be in the campaign. She crossed the river, that's what I like to say, and went east and met me at AT&T where I was working at the time, and she wanted to visit me there, find out what I was doing, because she had heard from Dr. Lambier's about me. So there was a gap between the time I went to graduate school and that time frame, which was around 2009, well, 2000 and probably 2015, 16, something like that. That I kind of had a not really a connected relationship with TCU through the journalism school at the time. It wasn't a Schieffer school. But the Neely School would call me, and I would review candidates, stuff like that. But Dr. Lambier's, she was at UNT at the time. And she would call me because some of my employees finished UNT. Oh. And she would call me out to speak. So it took Dr. Lambier's, after coming to TCU, to tell Dr. Bunton about me and a couple of the professors who were still here. My thesis chairperson, Dr. Anantha Babbily, you've got to talk to him. I don't know if his name has come up. He's Indian. But this is a man who would gather the black students in the journalism department, all 4 of us, put us in the back of his BMW every second Tuesday, and take us to the National Association of Black Journalists meeting that was local to Fort Worth at the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. Wow. And if that man didn't do that, I would not be sitting here in front of you today doing what I did. I got my first television job because of that. You know, meeting Janet Johnson and some of the best producers and anchors and everybody in the industry. But it's because he took the time to take the black students. We would have been disconnected. There was no NABJ chapter on campus at that time. Anyway, gosh, I've forgotten what all I was saying. We were talking about Jennifer Giddings. Sorry, there was a lot to tell in there. Jennifer. So yeah, I saw the microfilm, saw the microfiche. It was depressing. When I came back to campus my senior year, I had interned at WFAA in downtown Dallas and gotten a taste of what real life could be for me. And it was a wrap. I was like, if I can get through my senior year as fast as possible, that's what I want to do. Quit the cheerleader squad and was like, my eye is on graduation. I am marching and I'm going to do what God has for me to do, because I have some great things in store. I don't know what all they are, but they are. But Dean Button came to visit me at AT&T and learned about my story. I told her about the homecoming thing, because I asked her, I was like, what do you want to know about me and TCU? Because it's not all roses, you know? And she said, I want to hear it all. I told her everything. And she said, okay. She said, but you have a lot to offer, and if I can engage you in some way, would you be willing? I said, sure. I expected her to call back and say, we'd love for you to come guest lecture, you know, blah, 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 which they did. But her next call was, we want you to be in this Lead On campaign. Now, what I would find out at that reception, dinner, whatever we were, that was for Bob Schieffer that day, was that Bob was actually supposed to be the face of the Lead On campaign for Schieffer. And she recommended that it be me instead.
Why is that?
She said that she thought that I was more relatable, first of all, but she also wanted to see a woman, and she wanted to see a woman of color represented. But she also felt like my story was compelling enough to undergird that message around, you know, community and the greater good. And so apparently they put it to a vote, and I edged out Bob Schieffer. This is crazy. So it was exciting for me to come to that and actually meet Bob that night.
Wow.
But I remember telling my parents, I was like, you know, the whole homecoming thing, they're like, yeah. I was like, 30 billboards across Dallas, Fort Worth, and the, you know, and the national ad. I mean, my phone would blow up every time a football game came on, and my face was on the TV for like 3 seconds, right? And I would get texts, hey, I saw you, oh my God, you know? And I'm like, that kind of made up for things. And I do believe that Dean Button took that step when she heard that story too. So I can't say for sure that she was like, okay, we owe this to her, but I also do believe that she felt there was merit in my story around what I was doing in my career, and, you know, staying connected with the school. I was guest lecturing from time to time then too, and before long I would put my name in the hat to adjunct, because I believed that there were students that needed to see me, and not just on the billboard. They needed to see a woman of color
in the classroom.
Yeah, who had over 30 years in strategic comms, some of the best brands.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. We're going to take a short break.